3 months passed. The Academy announced its yearly Innovation Forum, where students would present original research. It was the biggest event of the school year, with visitors from across the galaxy. "We should enter together," Zix suggested to Amber during one of their study sessions. The insect-like student had become her closest friend. "I agree," said Telemorin, surprising them both. The Zetherian girl had changed greatly since that first day in class. Our combined approaches could solve something important. Amber looked at her former bully, now her study partner. "What problem should we tackle?" Telemorin's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "The biggest one. Creating stable wormholes between non-compatible dimensional states. No one has solved it yet." Zix's antennae drooped. "That is too hard. Teams of top scientists have failed for years. But they all think the same way," Amber said, warming to the idea. "We don't. We have 3 different approaches." And so they began. For weeks, they worked after classes, combining their strengths. Telemorin provided the mathematical precision. Zix understood how particles could be linked across space. Amber's visual method showed how to shape the dimensional gateways. Professor Nex Valra checked on their progress. "Your approach is unorthodox," he said, but his glowing patches pulsed with approval. "Continue." The night before the Innovation Forum, they tested their model in the school's simulation chamber. On the huge circular display, they watched as their wormhole formed, wobbled, and then, unlike all previous attempts, stabilized. "It works." Zix jumped up and down, all 4 arms waving. Telemorin actually smiled. "We have done what no one else could." The day of the forum arrived. The great hall was filled with students, teachers, and visitors from many worlds. When it was their turn to present, Amber felt her heart race, but she stepped forward with her friends. "We present a new model for stable wormholes," Telemorin began formally. "Using a 3-species collaborative approach," Zix added. Amber activated their display. "By combining Zetherian mathematics, Vesperian quantum theory, and human spatial visualization, we found what others missed." As they explained their breakthrough, the audience grew silent. Representatives from the Galactic Science Council leaned forward in their seats. Professor Nex Valra's patches glowed with pride. When they finished, questions flew from all sides. One dignitary, an elder Zetherian with formal robes, stood up. "This is remarkable," he said. "Not just the solution, but how you found it. 3 species, 3 thinking styles, 1 breakthrough." After the presentation, researchers from major institutions surrounded them. Everyone wanted to talk to the unlikely trio. Research opportunities were offered. The Galactic Science Council representative requested a private meeting. Amber caught Professor Nex Valra's eye across the room. He nodded to her, a gesture of respect that once would have seemed impossible. By the next day, news of Amber's unusual method had spread throughout the Academy. As she walked to class, aliens of different species watched her pass. Some pointed, some whispered, but unlike before, their attention wasn't mocking. It was curious. Professor Nex Valra was waiting when she arrived at the classroom. "Miss Sullivan, other teachers wish to see your visual method. Are you willing to demonstrate?" Amber nodded nervously. Instead of the regular lesson, 3 other professors joined the class. One was a floating cloud of purple gas. Another had 8 eyes on stalks. The third looked almost human except for the silver skin. "Please solve this," Professor Nex Valra said, displaying a new problem on the holoboard. With everyone watching, Amber began to draw. She explained her thinking as she worked, showing how she turned abstract math into shapes and patterns she could understand. When she finished, all 4 professors huddled together, talking quickly in a language her translator couldn't catch. "This approach has significant implications," Professor Nex Valra announced finally. "We will form a special study group to explore it further." After class, Zix bounced up to Amber. "You have made history. No first-year student has ever started a special study group before." Even Telemorin approached. The Cytherean girl had lost her mocking smile. Your method is interesting. I would like to understand it better. By the end of the week, Amber found herself teaching a small group that included Zix, Telamorin, and even Drav the Blob student. They'd met in a small room after regular classes. Show us again how you see the folding of dimensions, Telamorin asked. Amber drew on a portable holoboard. I picture it like folding paper. If this corner touches this edge, it creates a shortcut through space. Zix's compound eyes reflected the light of her drawing. I see it now. It's like the way my species builds hives, with connecting tunnels that bypass longer routes. Even Telamorin began to catch on. This reminds me of ancient Cytherean art patterns. They might have understood space this way before we developed formal mathematics. The other human students at the academy noticed the change too. Suddenly, professors were asking them questions about how they visualized problems. Some showed similar abilities to Amber's. Others had different, but equally unique approaches. Kyle, another human student, discovered he could hear mathematical patterns as music. A girl named Lily found she could understand complex chemical reactions by thinking of them as recipes for cooking. Professor Nexvalra called a meeting of all teachers. We have been blind, he told them. Each species brings not just different knowledge, but different ways of knowing. We must adapt our teaching to include all these approaches. For the first time since arriving, Amber felt like she belonged at the academy. Not because she had become like the others, but because they had started to value the way she was different. Correct. Telamorin stood up from her seat. That cannot be right. Run the verification again. Professor Nexvalra's patches glowed brighter as he touched the board once more. The system ran its check again. The same symbol appeared. Correct, he repeated. And not just correct. The solution identifies pattern efficiencies that... He paused, as if unsure how to continue. That I had not considered. The classroom erupted in confused talking. Zix's antennae wiggled with excitement. Drav, the blob student, changed colors from green to yellow. How did you see this? Professor Nexvalra asked Amber. His voice held no mockery now, only genuine curiosity. Amber pointed to the spiral shape in her drawing. This part reminded me of how water goes down a drain. Particles would follow the same path if given the chance, and these crossing points are like highway intersections. Traffic, particles, build up here before moving on. The professor studied her work more closely. You use physical analogies from your planet to understand multidimensional physics. I guess so, Amber said. I've always done it this way. In high school, when I couldn't understand math problems, I would draw them out as real things I could see and touch. Professor Nexvalra turned to face the class. What we are witnessing is unexpected. The human brain, while less developed in computational areas, appears to possess spatial visualization abilities that our teaching methods do not account for. He turned back to Amber. May I see your notebook? Amber nervously handed it over. The professor flipped through pages of her drawings. With each page, his glowing patches pulsed faster. These are not random doodles, he said finally. These are sophisticated spatial models of concepts from our lessons. Primitive in execution, but remarkably accurate in their relationship mapping. He held up the notebook for the class to see. What we dismissed as distraction was actually a different form of note-taking, one suited to the human brain structure. Telamorin approached the board, studying Amber's drawing with new interest. It looks like art, not mathematics. Perhaps the distinction is smaller than we believed, Professor Nexvalra said. Miss Sullivan has found a bridge between them. He turned to Amber. Can you solve other problems this way? Amber nodded. I think so. If I can see it, I can usually figure it out. Fascinating, the professor said. His three eyes blinked in sequence. It seems we have much to learn from each other. The rest of the class time passed in a blur. Professor Nexvalra asked Amber to solve 2 more problems using her method. Each time, her visual approach found correct answers through paths no one had considered. By the end of class, the room had changed. The students looked at Amber with new eyes, not as a primitive human, but as someone with a gift they didn't understand. The classroom fell silent as Amber worked at the holoboard. Even Professor Nexvalra seemed too curious to interrupt her. "May I try a different way?" Amber asked, her voice small but steady. The professor waved one of his 6 arms. "Proceed. It makes no difference." Instead of using the mathematical symbols everyone expected, Amber began to draw. Her fingers traced lines, circles, and connecting shapes across the board. The equation transformed into something that looked more like a picture than math. Laughter bubbled up from the back of the room. "What is the human doing?" Tella Morin asked loudly, drawing pictures for her home refrigerator. More laughter followed. Even Professor Nexvalra's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. But Amber ignored them. In her mind, the 12 dimensions of the problem weren't abstract concepts. They were spaces she could see and feel. Her drawing showed how these spaces connected and how particles would move through them. "This part here," she said, pointing to a spiral she had drawn, "shows the path of highest probability. And these intersections," she pointed to where several lines crossed, "are where particles are most likely to appear." The laughter faded. Professor Nexvalra moved closer to the board, his 3 eyes narrowing as he studied her work. "This is not standard mathematical notation," he said. His voice had lost some of its mockery. "Explain your method." Amber took a deep breath. "I can't understand the symbols you use. They don't make sense to me. But I can see the spaces in my head. I've always been able to visualize things this way." She pointed to her notebook on her desk. "That's why I draw during class. I'm not ignoring the lessons. I'm translating them into something I can understand." She continued adding to her diagram, explaining as she went. "If you look at it this way, the 12 dimensions fold like this, and the particles flow along these paths of least resistance." The room was completely silent now. Even Tella Morin was leaning forward, trying to understand what she was seeing. Professor Nexvalra's glowing patches pulsed with a new rhythm. Slower, more thoughtful. He circled the holoboard, viewing Amber's work from different angles. "This approach is unorthodox," he said finally. Amber's heart sank. She had tried her best, but it wasn't enough. She waited for the final judgment, for the professor to dismiss her effort as primitive human thinking. Instead, he did something unexpected. He touched the corner of the holoboard, activating a verification protocol. The board scanned Amber's drawing, analyzing it against the original problem. A symbol appeared above the board, one that Amber didn't recognize, but that caused the classroom to erupt in surprised murmurs. "Correct," Professor Nexvalra said, his voice barely audible over the growing noise. "The solution is correct." 2 weeks passed. Amber tried her best to understand the lessons, but most went over her head. Each day, she filled her notebook with more drawings. They weren't random doodles. They were her way of making sense of the strange concepts. When Professor Nexvalra announced the first demonstration session, the room went quiet. "Today we begin our public problem solving," he said. His glowing patches pulsed with a blue light that seemed almost excited. "I will call students to the holoboard to solve equations before the class." Everyone knew what this really meant. The professor would pick students he thought would fail. It was his way of showing who belonged and who didn't. "First today," Professor Nexvalra said, his 3 eyes scanning the room slowly, "we will have our Earth specimen show us how humans approach complex physics." Amber's stomach dropped. She felt all eyes turn to her. "Amber Sullivan, come to the board," he commanded. Her legs felt heavy as she walked to the front of the room. The holoboard was a large floating screen that responded to touch. As she approached, it lit up with a complex problem. "This is a simple 12-dimensional particle emergence calculation," Professor Nexvalra explained to the class. "Let us see how our human guest approaches it." Amber stared at the equation. It was a mess of symbols she didn't understand. Some weren't even in her translator's memory. The room was so quiet she could hear the soft hum of the floating desks. Perhaps humans do not teach this level of mathematics, Professor Nexvalra asked. His tone made it clear he already knew the answer. Telamorin, the Zetherian girl, gave a small laugh. Professor, maybe you should give her something simpler. Like 2 plus 2. Several students joined in the laughter. Amber's face burned with shame. It is regrettable that we must include developing species in our academy, Professor Nexvalra said. But it is our duty to guide them, however limited their understanding might be. Amber wanted to disappear. She stared at the equation, hoping for a miracle. Then she noticed something. Part of the pattern looked familiar. It reminded her of a drawing she had made in her notebook 2 days ago. Without thinking, she reached out and touched the equation. The holoboard responded to her touch, letting her move symbols around. She wasn't solving it the way the professor expected. Instead, she began rearranging the parts into a visual pattern that made sense to her. What is she doing? Someone whispered. Professor Nexvalra's glowing patches dimmed slightly. Miss Sullivan, that is not the correct approach, To. Wait, Amber said quietly, surprising herself with her boldness. I think I see something. Amber stood frozen at the entrance to the classroom. Unlike the plain rooms at her old school, this one was alive with technology. Desks hovered above the floor. Holographic displays floated in the air. The walls themselves seemed to shift colors. Move, human, said a voice behind her. A tall Zetherian student with blue skin pushed past her. You blocked the doorway. Amber quickly found her assigned seat. The desk adjusted itself to her height as she sat down. Around her, students of different alien species took their places. Some looked almost human. Others were completely strange, like the blob of green jelly that oozed into a seat across from her. Greetings, human classmate, said a friendly voice. Amber turned to see an insect-like creature with large compound eyes and 4 arms. Each arm ended in delicate fingers. I am Zix, the creature said. This is my first cycle at the academy too. Before Amber could respond, the room darkened. A tall figure glided to the front of the class. Professor Nexvalra had 6 arms, gray skin, and patches that glowed bright blue. His head was long with 3 eyes set in a triangle. Welcome to multidimensional physics, he said. His voice was deep and cold. This is a basic course, but I expect excellence. His glowing patches flashed brighter as his eyes scanned the room. They stopped when they reached Amber. I see we have a human this cycle, he said. The way he said human made it sound like pest. How interesting. The other students turned to stare at Amber. A Zetherian girl named Telamorin gave a small laugh. Today we begin with 4-dimensional probability curves, Professor Nexvalra continued. A complex image appeared in the air before him. It showed shapes that seemed to fold into themselves in impossible ways. Amber's translator struggled with the terms the professor used. Words like quantum spatial manifold and hyperdimensional tangent came through, but she had no idea what they meant. She tried to take notes, but soon gave up. Instead, she began to doodle in her notebook, drawing the strange shapes she saw in the floating display. In this class, weakness is not tolerated, Professor Nexvalra announced. Each of you will be tested. Those who fail will bring shame to their species. The blob of green jelly, Drav, as Amber would later learn, rippled nervously. Even Zix's antennae drooped. Your understanding will be demonstrated, not just spoken, the professor continued. I will call students to solve problems before the class. This builds character. His glowing patches pulsed as he looked at Amber again. She felt a chill. She knew he was sizing her up, looking at her as an easy target. As the lesson continued, Amber kept drawing. The shapes in her notebook weren't exactly what the professor showed. They were simpler patterns that made sense to her mind. She didn't know it yet, but these doodles would soon change everything. Amber Sullivan stared out the viewport as the transport ship approached the massive space station. The blue planet Zetheria loomed below. Her heart raced. How had a regular girl from Nebraska ended up here? 6 months ago, her science teacher had pushed the whole class to apply for the Galactic Exchange Initiative. Amber had filled out the form just to avoid detention. No one was more shocked than she was when her name appeared on the acceptance list. All humans proceed to Bay 12 for processing, announced a flat, mechanical voice. Amber grabbed her small bag and joined the line of 20 other humans. They looked different from her, confident, smart, and prepared. Most came from fancy science schools. They had perfect grades. Amber felt like a mistake that no one had caught yet. A tall blue alien with 4 eyes met them at the bay entrance. His skin had a metallic shine, and he wore a uniform with many strange symbols. "I am Krill, your orientation guide," he said. His mouth didn't match his words. The translator implant behind Amber's ear converted his speech. "Humans are the newest species admitted to the Academy. You should be honored." He didn't sound like they should be honored. He sounded annoyed. The station itself was amazing. Halls curved in ways that didn't make sense. Gravity changed as they walked from section to section. Aliens of all shapes moved purposefully around them. Some floated. Some crawled. Some had too many limbs to count. The Zetherian Academy of Advanced Sciences accepts only the brightest minds in the galaxy, Krill continued as they walked. Your inclusion is a diplomatic courtesy. One of the human students, a boy named Kyle, raised his hand. What will our classes be like? Krill's upper eyes blinked while his lower ones stayed fixed on the group. You will be placed in beginner courses appropriate for your limited understanding. Amber felt her face grow hot. Every alien they passed stared at the humans. Some pointed. Some made sounds that might have been laughter. Later, in her small room, Amber checked her class schedule on the strange tablet they'd given her. Her first class was multidimensional physics with Professor Nextvalra. When she tapped on the class description, a warning appeared. This course is considered elementary for first-cycle students, but may challenge species with underdeveloped scientific understanding. Amber flopped onto her bed. The mattress adjusted to her body in a weird but comfortable way. What am I doing here? She whispered to herself. I barely passed regular physics. Tomorrow would be her first day at the academy. The knot in her stomach told her it wouldn't go well, but there was no turning back now. Earth was 8 light years away, and she had a point to prove, even if she wasn't sure what that point was yet. 1 year after Amber first arrived at the Zetherian Academy, she stood beside Professor Nextvalra at the entrance ceremony for new students. This year, the human group was 3 times larger than before. Welcome to the Academy, Professor Nextvalra said to the gathered students of many species. His glowing patches pulsed with a warm, steady light. You come from different worlds, with different bodies and different minds. We once thought this meant some of you were less capable. We were wrong. Amber watched the new human students. They looked nervous but proud. Unlike her group last year, these humans had been recruited eagerly, not just accepted as a diplomatic gesture. The professor continued. Intelligence shows itself in many forms across the galaxy. The greatest scientific advances happen when different ways of thinking work together. Much had changed in a year. After their wormhole breakthrough, Amber, Zix, and Telemorin had become famous throughout the Academy. The Galactic Science Council had funded their research, and scientists across the galaxy were testing their model. But the biggest change was in the Academy itself. Classes were now taught using multiple methods. Visual learners used drawing techniques like Amber's. Mathematical thinkers followed traditional approaches. Others used sound, movement, or touch to understand complex concepts. No single way was considered best. Professor Nextvalra gestured to Amber. Miss Sullivan will now say a few words. She is the first human to be offered a permanent teaching position at the Academy after graduation. Amber stepped forward, remembering how scared she had been in this same hall a year ago. When I first came here, she said, I thought I didn't belong. I couldn't understand the way the professors taught, but I found my own way to see the problems. She activated a small holoprojector. One of her visual models appeared, floating above her hand. This method is now called Sullivan's spatial mapping. But it's just one of many ways to understand the universe. Each of you brings something special to the Academy. Don't try to think like everyone else. Show us how you see things. After the ceremony, Professor Nexvalra walked with Amber through the Academy gardens. I once called you to the board to show your weakness, he admitted. Instead, you showed us our own. Amber smiled. We all learned something that day. Indeed, the professor said, your human expression is never judge a book by its cover, yes. We judged your species too quickly. As they walked, students of many species greeted them. Some were using Amber's mapping method on portable holoboards. Others were teaching their own unique approaches to classmates. What had begun as an attempt to embarrass one human student had changed education across the galaxy. And Amber Sullivan, once the outsider, had found not just her place in the stars, but had helped others find theirs too. The end.